We did an interview together. We took a picture together, and that picture went viral. Now, why did that picture go viral? Because people saw themselves reflected. It was the power of representation. And Donald Trump weaponizes that.
She is the U.S. representative for Massachusetts' 7th District. She's been in office since 2019. She's Representative Ayanna Pressley.
Thrilled to be here with all of you. Thank you. I'm big admirers and fans of the two of you, and I'm glad to be with you today.
Let's get into it. Okay, so President Trump has clearly included playing up unrest in cities in part of his re-election strategy. He's even gone as far as to imply that Democrats are to blame for escalating violence at protests. How do progressives and Democrats push for police reform in a world where an attempt at pursuing justice is spun as a rush to anarchy by right-wing media and used as an excuse to become violent by law enforcement officials?
What can I say about Donald Trump? These aren't even dog whistles anymore. They are just blaring foghorns, wrapped up in incendiary sound bites and cruel policy and a callous administration. So it's very predictable. This is an old play. And this is the sort of, in movement building work, we're used to it. And how do we advance policy? The way we've always advanced policy as a nation, and that's through movements. A lot of people, when they think of when they reflect back on those grainy images, those black and white images of protests and demonstrations in the 1960s, they will define the progress that came out of that solely as the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. But honestly, that movement was the blueprint for every progressive piece of legislation thereafter. So this is how legislation is moved. It's through movement building and social transformation. And that is why now things like ending qualified immunity, which is a bill that I introduced with Representative Justin Amash, are now a part of the public discourse. That is from organizing and mobilizing, conversations around reimagining our budgets to actually value Black lives. That has everything to do with the power of movement building. And so we have to continue to do that. And then we're in this moment of national reckoning on racial injustice. There's a culture shift occurring where people will now very unapologetically affirm that Black lives matter. But now that has to translate into a power shift that is reflected in who we elect to office, the laws that we write, and the budgets that we write. Those are the only receipts that matter. So if you believe that Black lives matter, then Black representation matters, then Black data matters, then Black homeownership matters, Black entrepreneurialism matters. And so that's how I seek to legislate, is in a very precise way. And I'll just end here by saying the disproportionate hate, hurt, and harm that has been foisted onto Black Americans for generations was not naturally occurring. It was legislated, it was precise, it was codified in lawmaking. And so the path forward must be one where we are also precise. Reverend Barber, the Poor People's Campaign, someone that I look to, often as just someone I admire tremendously and grateful for his moral clarity and conviction, says we're in a moment of reckoning that demands a third reconstruction. And so that's what we need to be squarely focused on, is what does that third reconstruction look like? And how do we enlist everyone from organizers to lawmakers as community builders in that reconstruction of a better, more equitable and just world?
Ayanna. And I'm calling you Ayanna because I've known you since the 90s. And that's just how it's going to be. When you were telling me what's what. Let's not forget. This week, Joe Biden gave a speech and he released an ad where he made the point to clarify that contrary to what the Trump camp is saying about him, he doesn't actually like property destruction that has occurred where some protests have occurred. By doing this, is Biden allowing Trump to control the conversation?
Let me just say this. There is an effort to infiltrate and to undermine the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement. and the fact that these mobilization efforts have continued, which is constitutional. You know, the right to assemble, to peacefully protest. Dissent is the ultimate patriotism. You know, James Baldwin said, I ostensibly, and I'll paraphrase, like, I criticize this country, you know, America, because I love it just that much, you know, and she can and must be better. The people that I see in community who are the four of these movements, they are community builders, not destroyers. And the people that are doing that are infiltrators who want the Black Lives Matter movement to be maligned, to be mischaracterized. But the people doing the work of justice seeking are peacekeepers. You know, and I also think it's important that we not completely rewrite history and sanitize what these movements have looked like in the past.
Right.
You know, so people will bring up Dr. King and they'll bring up John Lewis. Okay, well, John Lewis was who practiced nonviolent, peaceful protest, almost died on that bridge. And many times thereafter, in fact, many advocates have said, it seemed like we don't know how John Lewis made it out alive because they always focused on his head. You know, Dr. King practiced nonviolence. He was assassinated. So I say all that to say, we denounce violence. No one endorses violence. And I do think it's important to make that point because violence does beget violence. And it's incumbent upon all of us to denounce that in all of its form, while also confronting and being honest about that which is most violent and pervasive. And that is structural and systemic racism born out of the original sin of this country that we have been living under for 401 years. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's and, I think it's or. Alyssa, we have to hold space, you know, for both things. And we have to acknowledge the gamesmanship on the other side. This is a predictable play. And so it is necessary that we confront it, you know, head on so that they don't it's not playing in their hand as much as it is taking away that power, taking away that sound bite and that talking point that can so easily be mischaracterized. Let me just close here. You know, Dr. King said, the riot is the language of the unheard. Now, if someone were to say that today, like it's like now the right will co-opt Dr. King and, you know, do all this, it's like, was he inciting violence? To just state that as an affirmation, a riot is the language of the unheard. He wasn't encouraging rioting or looting.
Right.
He was saying that people are out here affirming, demanding that their humanity be seen. Mm-hmm. You know, that we have equal rights. So I just, this is a very predictable play. Convenient, predictable, don't take the bait.
Mm-hmm. On that note, we're getting toward the final stretch before Election Day. So how are you feeling about Democrats' prospects to take the White House, and how about the Senate?
Yeah, I feel very encouraged. So yesterday was my primary. And
which, congratulations.
Thank you very much. I mean, you know, an improbable candidacy, you know, discounted, underestimated in every way 2 years ago. They had us down in the polls days before the election by 13 points. We won by decisive 17. And the reason why I want to start there is because the reason why we won 2 years ago is because we did not make assumptions about who desires and deserves a seat at the table of democracy. And we were organizing and engaging in a way that was disruptive. And when I say disruptive, I mean innovative, challenging conventional norms and assumptions about what voters to talk to and when and about what. We expanded the electorate. And I ran unopposed, but we had over 300 volunteers. We were very active in our engagement. It mattered to us because we wanted to make sure that this electorate, this table which we expanded, that those folks remain engaged, both to complete their census, to vote, to be a part of this community building of this third Reconstruction. In our race 2 years ago, we expanded the Latino vote by 70%. The student vote in some communities by 400%. 26% of our voters, it was the first time they participated in a primary. We won by 17 points. Yesterday, what I saw on the ground, unprecedented turnout. And we should feel encouraged by that, because I think given the draconian, uncertain times we find ourselves in, and these unprecedented challenges, a public health crisis, an economic crisis, bore by that pandemic, and then this national reckoning on racial injustice, persistent income inequality, all these things, maybe folks thought that would suppress the vote, that people would feel so heavy based upon the gravity of our challenges, but they're actually more emboldened and more motivated. I can't tell you how many poll workers I met who were 16 years old, 17 years old, 18 years old. I said, what are you doing here? And they said, I care about our democracy. I care about our community. Most poll workers are retirees. They have underlying conditions. I didn't want them to make themselves vulnerable. I mean, I left feeling hopeful, excited, and confident that people are going to show up, and they're going to show up in droves. And, I think having Vice President Biden and Senator Harris at the top of the ticket in this way, we're going to see the residual benefit with the opportunity to take back the Senate. These races are really in play. I mean, the fact that Jamie Harrison is in a dead heat with Lindsey Graham, I mean, these are very exciting indicators. So I place my bets on the people. I believe in the power of the people, and they are not allowing themselves to be apathetic or cynical. They are more emboldened. They are more righteous. They are more organized. And we're going to see that. We saw that at the polls yesterday, and I think we're going to continue to see that. So I'm very encouraged. And not to mention, look, I always say the squad is more than 4 members of Congress. It's anyone doing the work of building a more equitable and just world. But we were all considered to be vulnerable. Even though I was running unopposed, there were a lot of efforts to undermine. And we all decisively won our elections because of powerful, decisive mandates from the people, of progressive policies, and a more equitable and just vision for our country. You see that also in the elections of Mondaire Jones and Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush. So I think these are all very encouraging indicators.
So Ayanna, you should know that Erin and I have decided that we're signing up to be poll workers this year. So we're going to help people who should not be out there. We're going to take some of the load from them. But when we think about the very limited time we have between now and Election Day, what are the concrete things that you are doing between now and then? And what would you advocate that our listeners, whether in battlegrounds or not, be doing to help make sure that we have a positive outcome on Election Day?
All right, so here's 2 tangible things right away. Complete the census. Okay? I represent one of the most undercounted districts in the country, and one of the most under-resourced, and one of the most unequal, okay? So there's a correlation there. And when you look at the disproportionate impact of COVID in marginalized communities, that's my district. My district was the hardest hit in this Commonwealth by COVID. And that has everything to do with unequal access to healthcare, the comorbidities of structural racism, and communities that have disproportionately been under-resourced, underfunded, divested from, and over-policed. Complete the census. That is a tangible thing you can do right now. More funds for public education, for community development block grants for affordable housing, language access, Social Security, Medicare, Section 8, Head Start. Complete the census, okay? Secondly, vote. My mother always told me being a super voter was our superpower. So vote. And then I'm going to offer something that you wouldn't expect me to say, outside the box of be a poll worker, organize your block, write postcards, all those things. Everyone has a role to play in the movement. I want to ask you to intentionally inform joy, because joy is a necessary act of resistance. And so whatever that looks like for you, we find ourselves in really challenging times. These folks are trying to roll back the hands of time. All the gains we've made, they are coming for our civil liberties, for our civil rights, for the livability of our planet, for our democracy. When you see what's happening with the United States Postal Service and other blatant voter suppression intimidation tactics, don't give them your joy too. And so I really need you to be intentional about informing joy. And so what does that look like for me? Well, the other night I did log on to the Versus challenge between Brandy and Monica. That was informing joy for me. Those are the anthems and the soundtrack of my life, so even just little things like that, baking with my daughter, even though COVID fluff is real, I don't need to be baking anything. But, just being intentional about informing joy. And I want to say that I don't want you to inform joy just so that you can strengthen yourself to do the utility work of democracy and movement building. Like, inform joy just because your wholeness and your wellness and your peace matters, period.
That's a very good idea. And it's an important reminder, especially when it's so easy to get down and have it be almost like a roast of reality every single day. So as schools are resuming classes, sometimes against the advice of public health officials, teachers and school employees are going to be put in a dangerous position in some cases. Healthcare workers, farm workers, grocery store workers, other essential employees, they've all been put in harm's way by a patchwork, chaotic reopening during COVID. So in your opinion, what needs to change to assure that these workers are protected and fairly compensated for the risks that they're being forced to take?
Well, again, right now it's real simple. Sometimes people will say to me, you guys are moving all these bills out of the House, but why does it matter if they sit on the desk of Mitch McConnell? Listen, I'm not going to abdicate my responsibility to lead and to be responsive to the needs of my constituents. I've spoken to so many educators who, by the way, let's applaud the fact that they have been so nimble in the face of this pandemic, immediately transitioning to online learning, holding space for and trying to support their students who are ELL, special needs, living with trauma, which all these kids are right now because of this pandemic, because of the fear of deportation, because of the threat of displacement and eviction, because of food insecurity. Our teachers, my forever president, Barack Obama, called them nation builders. I never got to ask him why that is. I think it is because they pour into little people who go on to build up our world. Yeah. And they have been extraordinary. And even before the pandemic, we've asked too much of our educators. We don't invest in social-emotional wellness supports. We ask them to be school nurses, social workers, psychotherapists, instead of making those investments in wraparound supports. And now we're asking them to be caseworkers. Mm-hmm. So if we could just report the HEROES Act out of the Senate, get it to the floor for a vote, that was a massive infusion of federal funds that are necessary for the schools to be able to reopen safely, as well as funds necessary for a national testing strategy and contact tracing, which my callous, disconnected Republican colleagues across the aisle don't even believe in. They think it's a hoax. Mm-hmm. And so the HEROES Act, we need to move on that. And we need our states to stand in the gap of the failures of the Trump administration to make decisions that are informed by science and data. Mm-hmm. That's really it. And so until we get this pandemic under control, we have to have remote learning. And so then we have to then move relief packages that will support that online learning. And if they're going to be bottlenecked in the Senate, then we need governors to step up and mayors to step up. I mean, you guys, there's so many deep issues here. Like, if we give every kid a Chromebook, but they don't have a hotspot, what does it matter? Right. Mm-hmm. If we give them a Chromebook and they have a hotspot and both their parents are essential workers and they're helping to raise younger siblings or managing trauma, I mean, there's so much here. Like deep inequities and disparities that have only been, including the digital divide, that have only been exacerbated in the midst of this pandemic. So our decisions to reopen have to be driven and informed by science and data. We are asking our teachers already to be social workers and school nurses because we don't make that investment. And now we're asking them to be caseworkers and in some instances, martyrs. Mm-hmm. Because of where we have seen surges and clusters and outbreaks. Like, we can't afford to get this wrong. I have been so distressed by governors that have rushed to reopen. The callous disregard for the threat of human life is stunning. Mm-hmm. It's just stunning.
As we said before, you won your primary. The entire squad has won their primaries. We had Congresswoman Omar on a couple weeks ago, and we had an interesting chat, and we were curious about your take on this too.
Okay.
Why is right-wing media and so many of the politicians that love them, why are they so obsessed with you guys?
Yeah. So let me just say, that is because they have weaponized the things that are actually the most distinctive, resonant, beautiful, and unifying about all of us. You know, we didn't know each other before. And we met Alex and I had met because we were the only two that were challenging incumbents and then unseated them. So we were walking a very unique path. And so we could speak in this shorthand with each other about those unique joys and pains of that journey. But Rashida Ilhan and I had never met. And then we were at a Congressional Progressive Caucus freshman orientation. We did an interview together. We took a picture together, and that picture went viral. Now, why is that? And then Alex just put #squad goals. And then that picture went viral, and then people said, we're the squad. Now, why did that picture go viral? Because people saw themselves reflected. It was the power of representation. And Donald Trump weaponizes that. And I think how we show up in the world, the reason why we won is because we are authentic and unapologetic truth tellers, and we center our lived experiences in our work and the lived experiences of the marginalized. So even though we didn't know each other, we had an immediate kinship because of the shared beauty and pain of being women of color. And they've weaponized that. Listen, we're in September. Mm-hmm. This is Alopecia Awareness Month. So I just want to say a shout out to all those the 7 million Americans living with alopecia like myself. When I show up in a room, people are uncomfortable just because of how I show up in the world. A Black, bald woman, it challenges and defies conventional standards and norms of what is acceptable, what is professional, what is beautiful, what is feminine. And so we just upset people just for how we show up. And then never mind that we are seeking to legislate in a way that is intersectional, that is disruptive, that is honest about the injustice of the world. So I think it's a confluence of all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Like if you're going to show up and people are already mad at you, you might as well give them an even better reason to get mad at you.
You know, give them a reason. That's right. Look, I won't pretend that, look, guys, we're subject to a lot of very credible threats and very hurtful vitriol and rhetoric. You know, I do think we need to talk more about what women and women influencers and women in politics experience online. Mm-hmm. It is next level. Mm-hmm. So, but I think we continue to persist because we are emboldened by the people. Mm-hmm. And by the mandate that we have by the people who insist that we show up in the world exactly as we are. That's why they voted for us. So even when we're tempted to sort of shrink, you know, and to hide, that we can boss up because of the mandate of the people and the constituents that we represent.
Boss up, indeed. Representative Pressley, thank you so much for joining us. We've wanted you on the show since the very beginning, and we finally did it.
Thank you. I appreciate you all immensely.